Stop everything you're doing and listen, because Washington, D.C. is literally on fire right now, not with actual flames, but with pure governmental chaos, as Donald Trump just pulled the trigger on the most devastating attack on the American federal workforce in over a century, stripping 50,000 career government employees of their job protections in a single stroke, turning scientists, doctors, economists, lawyers, and experts who've served America for decades into at-will employees who can be fired for any reason or no reason at all, just like you fire a cashier at McDonald's. And agencies across the government are in absolute panic mode because nobody knows who's getting fired next. Veteran employees are walking out in protest. Critical government services are grinding to a halt. Social Security offices have massive backlogs. The IRS can't process tax returns. The VA is turning away sick veterans. And this isn't some future threat. This is happening right now, as the Office of Personnel Management published a 255-page rule on Thursday that takes effect in 30 days. And you're about to witness the complete destruction of the American government from the inside out. Let me take you back to understand how we arrived at this catastrophic moment where the entire foundation of American government is being demolished. Because to truly grasp what's happening, you need to know the history of the civil service system and why it was created in the first place. So let's go back to the 1800s, when America had something called the spoils system, where every time a new president was elected, he would fire all the government workers from the previous administration and replace them with his own political supporters. And this created massive corruption because government jobs went to whoever was most loyal to the president rather than whoever was most qualified. And it created chaos because every 4 or 8 years, the entire government workforce would turn over and institutional knowledge would be lost, and the whole system was a disaster. And then in 1881, something happened that changed everything. President James Garfield was assassinated by a man named Charles Guiteau, who was a disappointed office seeker. Guiteau had supported Garfield's campaign and expected to be rewarded with a cushy government job, but when he didn't get one, he became enraged and shot the president, and Garfield's assassination shocked the nation and created momentum for reform. And in 1883, Congress passed the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, which created a merit-based system for hiring and firing federal employees. The idea was that government workers should be hired based on their qualifications and expertise, not their political connections. And once hired, they should have job protection so they couldn't be fired just because a new president from a different party took office. And this system worked brilliantly for over 100 years. It created a professional, nonpartisan civil service that served the American people regardless of which party controlled the White House. And federal employees became experts in their fields. They were scientists studying climate change and developing vaccines. They were economists analyzing employment data and inflation trends. They were lawyers enforcing environmental regulations and consumer protection laws. They were doctors treating veterans. They were social workers helping seniors get Social Security benefits. And they did this work faithfully through Republican and Democratic administrations alike, because they were serving the public, not serving a political party. And the civil service protections meant they could speak truth to power. They could tell presidents uncomfortable facts. They could blow the whistle on corruption and waste, and they couldn't be fired for doing the right thing. But Donald Trump has always hated this system. From his very first day in office during his first term in 2017, Trump complained about the deep state, which is his term for career government employees, who he thinks are secretly working against him. And Trump's view is very simple and very authoritarian. He believes that everyone in the executive branch should be personally loyal to him, should follow his orders without question, and should never contradict him or provide independent expertise that conflicts with his preferred narrative. And this view is completely incompatible with the civil service system. So throughout his first term from 2017 to 2021, Trump tried various ways to get around civil service protections. He tried to intimidate employees. He moved entire agencies out of Washington, D.C. to force people to quit. He tried to freeze hiring. And then in October 2020, just weeks before he lost the election, Trump issued an executive order called Schedule F, which would have reclassified tens of thousands of federal employees in policy-related positions and stripped them of civil service protections. But before Schedule F could be implemented, Trump lost the 2020 election, and President Biden immediately revoked the order when he took office in January 2021, so Schedule F never went into effect. But Trump never never forgot about it. And when he ran for president again in 2024, one of his central campaign promises was that he would bring back Schedule F and drain the swamp by purging the federal government of employees who weren't sufficiently loyal to him. And now that he's back in power, he's making good on that promise in the most extreme way possible. Because what Trump did on Thursday, February 5th, 2026, was to finalize a new rule that's even more extreme than the original Schedule F. It's called Schedule Policy Career, and it was published by the Office of Personnel Management, which is the government's HR department. And this 255-page rule creates an entirely new category of federal employment that strips job protections from an estimated 50,000 to 55,000 career employees. And here's how it works. The rule applies to any federal employee whose job involves policy influencing work, and that definition is incredibly broad and vague. It includes anyone who provides advice to senior officials, anyone who helps implement regulations, anyone who analyzes data that informs policy decisions, anyone who works on legislation or rulemaking, basically anyone whose work could potentially affect what the government does. And under the new rule, these employees lose all of their civil service protections. They can no longer appeal if they're fired. They can no longer challenge disciplinary actions. They lose their whistleblower protections, which means if they see illegal activity or waste or fraud, they can't safely report it to independent watchdogs. Instead, they have to report it internally to their own agency, which means reporting it to the very people who might be committing the wrongdoing. And they're now treated exactly like political appointees who serve at the pleasure of the president, which is a fancy way of saying they can be fired for any reason or no reason at all. And the president gets to decide which specific jobs fall under this new category through an executive order. And according to OPM Director Scott Cooper, agencies have already submitted their proposals for which positions should be reclassified. And the White House is actively reviewing those proposals right now. And Cooper made it very clear what the goal is. He said, quote, "The goal overall of what the Schedule Policy S career is intended to do is to ensure that the president has the ability to affect his policy priorities in cooperation with senior managers in the agencies," end quote. And in plain English, that means Trump wants to be able to fire anyone who doesn't enthusiastically implement his agenda. And Trump's director of the Office of Presidential Personnel, Sergio Gore, was even more blunt. He told reporters, quote, "We are inundated every day in the federal government, unfortunately, with misconduct and poor performance by civil servants. It's a crisis. Agencies shouldn't have to go through layers of appeals and proceedings in order to fire someone or even discipline them," end quote. But here's the thing. That's a complete lie. Federal employees can already be fired for misconduct or poor performance. There's a process for it. Managers have to document the issues, give warnings, provide opportunities to improve, and if the employee still doesn't meet standards, they can be terminated. Yes, it takes some time and paperwork, but that's the point. The protections exist to prevent arbitrary or politically motivated firings. The process ensures that people aren't fired just because their boss doesn't like them, or because they provided data that made the administration look bad. But Trump doesn't want process or fairness or accountability. He wants total control, and now he has it. And the reaction to this rule has been swift and furious. Because the moment this rule was announced, federal employee unions, good government groups, legal experts, and even some Republicans started sounding the alarm about what a disaster this is going to be. Max Stier, who is the president and CEO of the Partnership for Public Service, which is a nonpartisan organization that works to improve government effectiveness, issued a scathing statement saying, quote, "No matter what the administration says, today's action has nothing to do with restoring merit in federal employment. This new designation can be used to remove expert career federal employees who place the law and service to the public ahead of blind loyalty and replace them with political supporters who will unquestioningly do the president's bidding," end quote. And Everett Kelly, who is the president of the American Federation of Government Employees, the largest federal employee union representing over 800,000 workers, said his union will file lawsuits to block the rule. And he said, quote, "Turning tens or maybe hundreds of thousands of these professionals into at-will employees doesn't make government more accountable," end quote. And Tom Devine, who is the legal director at the Government Accountability Project, which protects whistleblowers, said the rule turns the Whistleblower Protection Act, quote, "into a bad joke," end quote, because employees who are reclassified won't be able to safely report wrongdoing without risking their jobs. And legal scholars are already identifying multiple ways this rule violates existing law. First, they argue it ignores the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, which specifically provides job protections to career federal employees and limits at-will employment to political appointees. Second, they say the rule violates the Administrative Procedure Act because the public comment period was inadequate and the administration ignored 94% of the comments that were submitted. Yes, you read that right. When OPM first proposed this rule, they opened it up for public comment as required by law. And they received thousands of comments, and 94% of those comments opposed the rule. But the administration ignored all of that opposition and finalized the rule anyway. And third, legal experts say this violates the separation of powers because Congress created the civil service system through legislation, and the president doesn't have the authority to unilaterally dismantle it through executive action. So multiple lawsuits are being filed right now in federal courts challenging the legality of this rule. But here's the problem. Even if the lawsuits eventually succeed, that could take months or even years to work through the courts. And in the meantime, the rule takes effect in 30 days and Trump can start firing people. And the damage that will be done in those months could be catastrophic and irreversible. And we're already seeing what that damage looks like because Trump has been conducting a purge of the federal workforce for the past year using other methods, and the results have been chaos, absolute chaos. Let me give you some examples. At the Department of Education, Trump fired the entire Office of General Counsel team that specialized in grants, and as a result, schools and universities that depend on federal grant money couldn't access their payments. They got error messages saying the delays were due to severe staffing restraints, and this affected millions of students. At the Internal Revenue Service, Trump has been systematically cutting staff, and now taxpayers are experiencing massive delays. Phone wait times have increased dramatically. The backlog of cases has exploded, and tax refunds are being delayed. At the Social Security Administration, Trump cut staff and closed field offices, and now seniors who depend on Social Security benefits are facing enormous backlogs and can't get through on the phone. Some people are waiting months to resolve issues with their benefits. At the Department of Veterans Affairs, Trump fired doctors and nurses, and now veterans are facing longer wait times for medical care. And some VA facilities have had to turn away patients. At the Environmental Protection Agency, Trump fired so many employees that the agency can barely function. They can't properly monitor pollution. They can't enforce environmental laws. They can't respond to emergencies. And at the Department of Energy, Trump fired a grants officer without even telling his manager. The guy just showed up to work one day and found out he was fired. And these are just a few examples. This is happening across the entire federal government. And it's only going to get worse now that Trump has the authority to fire 50,000 more people. And here's what makes this especially dangerous. The people who are most at risk are the ones who are willing to tell the truth. The scientists who study climate change and report data. That shows it's real and getting worse. The economists who analyze employment numbers and report when the economy is struggling. The health experts who study diseases and recommend vaccines. The lawyers who enforce anti-corruption laws and investigate wrongdoing. The inspectors general who audit government programs and find waste and fraud. All of these people are now vulnerable. And if they provide information that Trump doesn't like, if they contradict his preferred narrative, if they uphold the law when Trump wants them to break it, they can be fired instantly, with no appeal, with no due process, with no protection. And what kind of government do you get when employees are terrified to tell the truth, when experts are silenced, when whistleblowers are punished? You get a government that serves the president's interests instead of the public's interests. You get corruption, you get incompetence, you get decisions based on politics instead of facts. You get agencies that can't do their jobs, and you get a democracy in crisis. So what happens next? Well, first, the rule takes effect in 30 days, unless a court issues an injunction blocking it. And federal employee unions and advocacy groups are racing to file those lawsuits right now. They're going to argue that the rule is illegal, unconstitutional, and should be immediately stopped. And they're going to ask judges to issue temporary restraining orders while the litigation proceeds. And there's a decent chance they'll succeed in getting at least some courts to block the rule temporarily. But Trump has stacked the federal courts with conservative judges during his first term, and now now during his second term, so it's not guaranteed, and even if lower courts block it, the case will eventually go to the Supreme Court, which has a 6-3 conservative majority, including 3 justices that Trump himself appointed, so the ultimate outcome is very uncertain. But in the meantime, assuming the rule does take effect, Trump will start identifying which specific positions get reclassified. And according to OPM, agencies have already submitted their lists. So this could happen very quickly. And once positions are reclassified, those employees can be fired at any time for any reason. And Trump has made it very clear that he plans to use this power aggressively. His entire second-term agenda depends on having a federal workforce that will unquestioningly implement his policies, no matter how extreme or illegal they might be. He wants to mass deport millions of immigrants. He wants to eliminate entire federal agencies like the Department of Education. He wants to gut environmental regulations. He wants to weaponize the Justice Department against his political enemies. He wants to manipulate economic data to make himself look good. And all of that requires getting rid of career employees who would normally push back or slow walk or resist these kinds of actions. So we should expect mass firings to begin within weeks, maybe thousands of employees fired in the first wave, and then ongoing purges as Trump identifies anyone who isn't sufficiently loyal. And the impact on government services is going to be devastating. Think about what happens when you lose 50,000 experienced federal employees. That's 50,000 fewer people processing Social Security claims, reviewing tax returns, inspecting food safety, monitoring air quality, managing veteran benefits, conducting scientific research, enforcing labor laws, protecting consumers, regulating financial markets, defending against cyber attacks, responding to natural disasters, all of these essential government functions that Americans depend on every single day. And when those employees are gone, those functions don't get done, or they get done poorly, or they get done by political appointees who have no expertise and no idea what they're doing. And beyond the immediate service disruptions, there's a long-term brain drain, because who's going to want to work for the federal government knowing they can be fired at any moment for political reasons? Talented scientists, engineers, doctors, lawyers, economists, they'll go work in the private sector or academia where they have job security and can do their work without political interference. So the federal government will increasingly be staffed by loyalists and yes men instead of experts, and the quality of government will decline. And this is exactly what's happened in other countries that have gone down this path. When Hungary's Viktor Orbán consolidated power, one of his first moves was to purge the civil service and replace career employees with political loyalists. And now Hungary's government is massively corrupt and incompetent. When Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan centralized authority, he fired thousands of judges, prosecutors, and civil servants and replaced them with allies. And now Turkey's institutions are broken. When Venezuela's Hugo Chavez took power, he systematically destroyed the professional civil service, and now Venezuela's government can barely function, and Trump is following the same playbook, and the results will be the same. A government that serves one man instead of the people, a government that's corrupt and incompetent, a government that can't be trusted. And the American people need to wake up to what's happening, because this isn't normal. This isn't just Trump being Trump. This is the systematic destruction of democratic institutions. This is authoritarianism in action. And if we don't fight back now, if we don't demand that our representatives in Congress pass legislation to protect the civil service, if we don't support the lawsuits challenging this rule, if we don't vote in the 2026 midterms to change the balance of power in Congress, then we're going to wake up one day in a country where the government exists solely to serve the president's whims, where facts don't matter, where expertise doesn't matter, where the law doesn't matter, and where ordinary Americans have no recourse when their government fails them. And that's not America. That's not what our founders intended. That's not what generations of Americans fought and died to protect. So this is a moment of truth. This is the moment when we decide what kind of country we want to be. And the clock is ticking, because in 30 days, this rule takes effect, and the purge begins, and everything changes.